Good morning at Properties. It's Friday, May 15th. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Amy Corr, and I've got Kevin Van Eck with me live from downtown. Grab your mug, and let's jump into another episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin.
Hey, good morning, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Yes, hopefully you have your mugs full of coffee for today. It's a beautiful start to Friday, to the weekend, and what we wanted to do today was invite on a special guest who's going to talk with us about what he's seeing in the market, about some ways that he approaches conversion and getting commitment from potential clients like we've been talking about in the Do It Now program over the last couple of weeks. And then also how he's been guiding his brokers, so that's a hint, he's a managing broker, guiding his brokers through the pandemic and the shelter in place.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm super excited to have Rick Sobin with us this morning. He is the managing broker of ELP and the Gold Coast office. We're thrilled to have him to join us today to really talk about his take on the market. So good morning, Rick. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Amy. How you doing? I totally heard that accent come out when you said that. I want to ask you guys something. So I feel like I'm on season 4 of Coffee with Amy and Kevin. I feel like, you've invited literally half the company on your program, and you have finally gotten around to me. I just want to let you know my feelings aren't hurt. Everything's still cool with us, but I'm glad to finally be here on season 4.
I love it. You barely made the list. Kidding.
Yeah, we wanted to kick off the season premiere with you.
Yeah,
Nice.
this is going to be the best season, so you're all good. You're kicking off the best one yet. All right, so I want to jump in with some of the questions we'd love for you to answer because we've talked to you so much about what you're seeing in the city and just what you're doing to guide so many of your brokers right now as we're still sheltering in place and, they're really doing everything they can to work effectively. And you've been hosting a lot of office meetings via Zoom, like a lot of the other managing brokers, and you're sharing a lot of great information. What's the vibe out there in your offices right now?
I think it's mostly positive. The only problem with that is I don't hear all of the negative stories. Right now I'm hearing a lot of the success stories. So I get calls from agents who are excited that they got a multiple offer. They're excited that they're getting new listings. They have a lot of showings. But I'm not hearing about all of those listings that maybe have been languishing and aren't getting showings. But mostly from what I'm hearing, I would definitely say it's a positive vibe.
Got it. So when you're hearing these positive stories, you share them with your office, I'm assuming. And one of the other things you shared with your offices this past week is an article from Barron's, right? There was an article that was talking about home values through the pandemic. And then there was another article that came out through Cranes. So as those articles were talking about home values, we've been concerned since the beginning of this and the impact on the real estate market. So what do you think the outlook is based on those articles and what you are seeing in the market and the success stories you're hearing from your agents?
Obviously it's hard to predict, and I don't want to be overly optimistic because I can only make a prediction by what we're seeing right now, but I'm just very encouraged the fact that we're doing so much to keep people in their homes. Forbearance, relief on rent. So we acted quickly to do things that we didn't do in the past to make sure people were still in their homes. So I think that's going to help us keep property values up. But another thing we really maybe forgot about starting in around mid-2018, we had a little slowdown and prices already started to come down in 18. Prices were coming down in 19. So by the time we got into the beginning of 20, we already had a little bit of a reset. So I feel like between prices coming down for a year and a half and lack of inventory, it's kept us at a very healthy pace right now. And because inventory levels are so low, we're seeing the median price actually climb a little bit. So I'm very encouraged right now.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear because one of the things that I'm hearing so much, especially being a managing broker in one of the suburban markets, there are a lot of sellers in our markets right now who have this concept or idea that there is going to be a big push of people moving out of the city to get into the suburbs. And while I do think there might be some pockets of people who were planning at some point to move to the suburbs anyway, I think this could have sort of pushed their time frame up a little bit. I wanted you to speak to your thoughts and what you're seeing in the city, because, you know, if there's that idea that everybody's moving out of the city, it kind of is left with, well, what's going to happen in the city? Are people going to stay? What is that market going to look like? Are people going to be able to sell if they're wanting to move out? So I'd love your take, because, you know, you're in that market right now, day in and day out with your brokers.
The same story about everybody moving to the suburbs reminds me of the story that everybody's leaving Illinois. Everyone's leaving the state. And, we found out over years, yes, we had some small drops, but it was just the term everyone was not really accurate. So when it comes to everyone's moving to the suburbs, I think we heard a few stories about a few clients that were moving to the suburbs, and all of a sudden this story started to kick in. Yes, we're seeing an uptick, and some people do want more space, and they do want a yard. But I think the term everyone and exodus is just overblown and not true. I know plenty of people who are selling in the city and upgrading in the city, so they're getting a bigger space. Maybe now they're getting a balcony. But I'm not seeing this, overwhelming talk of, let's get out of the city. When things do open up again, we have to remember there's still so many great restaurants and so many things to do here.
Well, and to that point, I was talking with Kevin earlier, who, just bought a place in the city. And I said, do you have any thoughts of fleeing anytime soon? And he said that in reality, this has made him recognize that once stuff does open up, how much he loves living in the city and the convenience of everything being so close. So, I do think you're going to get some of those people that are going to make that transition. Maybe people who are starting families and have recognized that they'll be heading there anyway. But, I'm excited and glad to hear from you that I think we're going to see some movement in the city, but it's going to be moving around from your existing place, maybe to find a more optimal living situation, now that you've been living in your home for quite some time, right?
Yeah, another thing behind the scenes that's happening is with so many people retiring, there is this transfer of wealth happening to their kids. So we are seeing parents helping their kids out with down payments. So I think that's also going to help people buy larger homes or buy bigger units as, parents help millennials out more.
Yeah, certainly. And I wanted to ask about foreclosures, because I know that you've had some of your brokers asking about foreclosures. And I think just really the concern of whether there's going to be an influx of issues with people who own homes due to layoffs and job losses. And, how have you been answering these questions, and, kind of what is your thought on this?
So many buyers are just waiting for the blue light special to kick in, and all of a sudden they can buy homes at half their value. But there are a couple things that are dramatically different now than they were in 9 and 10 when foreclosures were really popular. One of the first things are you couldn't give a home away in 2009. There was almost no price to get rid of it because everything was so overvalued. So banks literally were giving things away just to get them off their books. And then at some point, banks realized we don't have to give these properties away. We actually will get an agent to tell us what the price of the property is at market value, and we're going to start selling it at what market is. So now, cut to what's happening right now. People think there's going to be this wave of foreclosures, but the first thing is we're doing all these things to keep people in their homes. So that's going to be a problem. Then, if a home does go into foreclosure, it's not immediately available for sale. It might take a year, 2 years, or 3 years for that home to actually be sellable from the bank once they take possession of it. Lastly, again, an agent's going to come out, they're going to value the home, and now that banks have systems in place, which they never did back then, they're going to sell this home at market value. The only difference is going to be that home's been lived in by someone for 1 to 2 to 3 years that maybe didn't take such great care of it. So the whole idea of getting a good value on a foreclosure coming up, I wouldn't bank on it. And if I had buyers asking about it, I would strongly encourage them not to wait for that.
Yeah, so at the risk of sounding like the cliche, it's always a good time to sell, or it's always a good time to buy. For those buyers that are waiting on the sidelines for a good deal, it's probably not going to happen in that way. What about for sellers? For sellers right now, they're still hesitant in putting their properties on the market, fearful they may not get the best price or they may languish on the market. What would your advice be to them?
I couldn't imagine waiting to list for one reason. We know what the market is right now. We absolutely know what prices are right now, and we have 12 months of really good comps. Why wait a year when we don't know what the comps are going to be? We don't know what the market's going to be. At least we know what your value is right now, and you can bank on that. So I think waiting is risky. I think, you would only wait if you weren't sure if you really even wanted to sell.
Yeah, that is, it's just really interesting. And, the kind of shifting a little bit about what we've been focusing on with brokers, particularly this week in Do It Now, which, we've tried to rally and get everybody focused on their businesses. We've been talking a lot about conversion and, primarily or specifically using scripts and using some of the tools that we have to really gain confidence. But it was interesting because a lot of the feedback and some of the questions and things that Kevin and I have been going through this week with people is the challenge that we continue to hear is about confidence. So if one of your brokers asks you about gaining confidence, particularly with going on a listing presentation, where do you tell them to start? What are some of your words of advice?
The hardest part, I think, for people is they start too big. And they have this idea of this overwhelming presentation, and they don't know what to say, and they don't know what direction that the conversation is going to go, and they get overwhelmed, and they almost have too much to say. And my advice is break it down into wildly simple bullet points and have a little Post-it note next to your computer that you want to hit on these 4 things. And those bullet points are going to cue a bigger conversation, but you'll know the things you need to say and you'll be reminded of the points you need to hit on. But don't have this overwhelming idea that you need to go over all your stats. You need to go over the company stats. You need to go over every single marketing piece that you're going to do for them, because you have to remember to just stop, listen to the seller, listen to the client, and the rest is actually pretty easy. So if we're just queuing off of the actual customer, you don't really need that whole stress and fear of what am I going to say.
Right, agreed. That's great advice. And just taking small bits and keeping it simple. When we're in listing presentations, well, I guess going back, a lot of the challenges we're also hearing in addition to that surround the fear of rejection. And we've talked about how, no matter how confident someone is, there's always this little bit of fear of people saying no to you. And so for you, when a client in your career in the past or in a past career has told you no, how do you deal with rejection, and how do you enter into a situation with confidence and put the fear of rejection aside?
I think you have to say to yourself going into every presentation or every situation, out of 100% of my deals, X% I'm going to get rejected on. 5%, 10%, there's always going to be a number. So you first of all, you have to bring your expectations to a reasonable point, which is, all right, one of these people aren't going to choose me. And then secondly, you need to have your reaction already prepared for being rejected. Okay, I haven't been chosen. What is my gracious response to being rejected? So as soon as I think you have that response, it takes fear away of being rejected, because I already know what I'm going to say if you don't pick me, and it takes a lot of the pressure off. Where if you don't know how you're going to handle it if they don't choose you, it tends to make the conversation a little more tense along the way. Amy, I see you're smiling, so I'm hoping that you're agreeing with me.
No, I love that. You kind of already kind of psych yourself up or psych yourself out. We were talking about it, Kevin and I, yesterday, and I think so much of it is kind of going through all the possibilities of what might happen before it actually does, so that when whatever the outcome is, you've sort of expected it in some fashion. Because we all get rejected. I mean, I'm sure, Rick, it's probably far and few between, but I'm sure you've had some rejection in life. I know I have. I shared it yesterday, and Kevin has as well.
I guarantee you, I still have some addresses that I check in the MLS. I still have some sellers and buyers that I will never forget that they didn't choose me. Yes, I do have that. I'll get over it at some point, maybe.
Big mistake. Huge, right? All right, so I wanted to ask you about brokers who, we've been doing so much with pushing out Do It Now and trying to give agents just things to focus on in the month of May. But, there might be brokers who are still coming to you and saying that they don't feel like they're doing enough, or maybe they haven't been really doing very much at all up to this point. What's your advice right now? It's May 15th, middle of the month. We're going to hopefully, see a light at the end of the tunnel soon, and we're anticipating activity is going to pick up. What do you tell a broker right now?
A couple points about that. The first thing is, it's interesting. It's been a lot of joy for me seeing agents who have been in this business for a long time and have actually been doing your program. And I'm getting this response from them like, this is actually working. Like I actually wrote a card to someone and they responded to me. And I'm like, you make me feel so good by, vindicating that. But for someone that hasn't done anything yet, my advice is start really small. You're going to write one card today, and that's all you're going to do. You're not going to write 10, you're not going to write 15, and you're going to not let yourself off the hook until you've written one. And then the next day you're going to write 2. And then when people build on even the smallest activities and they start to see, results from that, and then I think it just encourages people to do more.
That's great advice, because we've given out a lot of, whether it's homework or things that agents can add to their business. And I understand it can be overwhelming, right? Especially if someone hasn't been doing anything. So your advice is really great in terms of just do something. And there's an effect. It's called the winner's effect. And you probably know about this. It's where when someone wins or gets positive feedback, they're more inclined to do more of that same impact, activity. And so I think that's what you're talking about with the card. As soon as someone reaches back out to them and says, thank you for the card, they're more likely to answer or write more cards the following day, right?
Yeah, the other thing to do, though, is make sure that you're building on what works for you. So if you're really strong in a certain area, just do more of that. And if there's one thing that you absolutely just don't want to do, don't get yourself stressed out and psyched out that you can't do that one task. Focus on what's working.
That's great. Well, thank you for being with us, Rick. This is likely going to be the most watched episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin. And if you're watching this, if you could, just refresh the screen on YouTube so we get more views, so Rick feels good about being the premiere of Season 4 of Coffee with Amy and Kevin. No, thank you, everyone, for watching us. Really appreciate it. And Rick, thank you for joining.
Yeah,
thanks,
Rick.
It was great to be here. I'll see you on Season 8.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everybody, make it a great day.